a good faith consultation actually look like in practice, then, considering that?
I think it's a matter of trust and being open about what you are doing. So discussions on a broader level in terms of engagement with another country, or if you're developing a trade agreement with another country, there are certain things that can be advised, what you're talking about, but there are also certain matters that need to be kept in confidence.
And does the declaration say that New Zealand have any retrospective impacts on existing agreements that you may have with China or any other partners?
No, this agreement is about us moving forward as two countries, the Cook Islands and New Zealand. It really clarifies, if you like, the relationship in terms of defence and security, and it's a platform now for us to build on and strengthen our close relationship that we have with New Zealand.
And my last question on this topic then is, so how do you balance growing ties with China or any other potential global partners while also maintaining New Zealand then as your partner of choice in security?
Well, New Zealand clearly, in the declaration that we've signed, is our partner of choice, but this does not dictate to us how our foreign policy is applied. And of course, as a country that is now graduated under the OECD, it is incumbent on the Cook Islands to be able to look at other development partners who wish to engage with the Cook Islands across a whole range of areas, to look at how we can best advance the priorities of our country, working closely with other countries and other development partners on areas of mutual collaboration.
That was Cook Islands Prime Minister Mark Brown. Tomorrow we will hear segment 2 of that interview discussing the local impacts of the global fuel crisis. The head of Child Fund New Zealand is calling on the government to use any reprieve provided by the US-brokered ceasefire with Iran to put in place support for Pacific countries amid the global fuel crisis. Josie Padani says while rising fuel prices are cutting household affordability across New Zealand, their analysis shows families in the Pacific Islands are being hit up to 6 times harder. As well as immediate support, she says work needs to start on longer-term solutions. I spoke with Ms. Padani and began by asking where the data has come from.
Well, we've crunched some numbers ourselves because we work mostly in the Pacific, and our partners, we're in contact with our partners in communities across the Pacific just about every day. So we're constantly assessing the impact of this fuel crisis and the Middle East war on the region. So what we've done is we've looked at the figures, local data, we've looked at IMF data, we've looked at Pacific data and compared it with New Zealand, and found that while fuel prices have gone up by about 20% in New Zealand, in the Pacific they've gone up to about 40%. So that's bad enough, but what makes it even worse is that the percentage of household income that people spend on fuel and transport in the Pacific is much, much higher than in New Zealand. So, there are several compounding factors. One is that most Pacific countries are highly dependent on imported fuel, imported food. So that means that the impact of fuel costs, of transport, of energy are far worse in Pacific countries than they are in New Zealand or anywhere else. And so these things, when we looked at it, we thought, wow, the impact here is potentially devastating. So luckily, we've got a 2-week ceasefire, and this is our opportunity to look at how we can make sure, and I know the New Zealand government, Winston Peters, is in the US at the moment, asking the US for exactly this. How can we support Pacific countries to have some tankers of fuel on standby in case the ceasefire doesn't hold? We've got 2 weeks to urgently try and get that done.
As you and I both know, the context even across the Pacific are quite varied. Are there particular countries that you've looked at, or is this a general overview?
It's a general overview. We've looked at it across the whole region, but of course we work primarily in the tougher places, if you like, the more remote places. So the remote communities in places like Solomon Islands, in PNG, in Vanuatu, in Kiribati. And so we know that because, we work there all the time with our partners, we know that that these communities are highly dependent on, a simple generator to get a water pump going to make sure that they've got water, either from a water tank or a desalination unit or distributing it through households. We know that these communities are hugely dependent on fuel for energy if they don't have solar panels or wind power or something. So we know in the communities that we work that it's impacting them massively. So we take that as a sort of anecdotal example of how the most remote islands with the least infrastructure are really struggling the most. And then you look at the cities and you look at the towns, and you can see even in places like Koniara, in Tarawa, in Kiribati, and in Port Moresby, the dependence again on transport, on fuel, on energy, all of which predominantly is imported. It's not made locally. That therefore means that the amount of increase in household incomes that's being spent on stuff is just gone up massively.
We currently have two severe cyclones circling the region as well. That would obviously compound things even further, wouldn't it?
That's right. So we're still in cyclone season. We're coming to April. We don't expect the cyclone season to finish for another month. We've got those two cyclones circling around, as you say. So that puts a huge pressure on the very vulnerable infrastructure, especially in the outer islands. In fact, just today we heard from one of our partners in Choiseul in Solomon Islands that there's been a lot of infrastructure knocked over by the cyclone. There's been fatalities even. So, on top of the natural disasters that are happening and that happen in the cyclone season, now there's this fuel crisis, there's the insecurity with the Middle East war. So I guess we're just calling on our government and on the US and other governments that support the Pacific to use this 2-week ceasefire to make sure that, at least there is some tankers heading towards the Pacific. But in the long term, we've got to think long term too. The development work we do, and whether it's Child Fund or any charity or New Zealand government, we have to make sure that we support the Pacific to be less dependent on imports, fuel imports, less dependent on food imports, supported to grow its own local food in the beautiful fecund environment of the Pacific. We can grow our own local food in this region, no problem. So I think all the development work we do long term is also really important, because it's going to be the long term answer to resilience and sustainability in the Pacific.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple, and iHeartRadio. For myself and the RNZ Pacific team, Lukumi Fala, next time more.
Welcome to RNZ Pacific. If you'd like to know more about us, check out our website, rnz.co.nz/Pacific.
This is an RNZ podcast. Hi, I'm Catherine Ryan, and welcome to It Takes a Village. Each week I talk to parenting experts, authors, psychologists, and others about the trials and trials